In 1492, Christopher Columbus crossed the Atlantic. He had compasses. He had maps. He had a crew of 90 men and every instrument Europe could offer. And he still barely made it. Now, around that same time, Polynesian sailors were crossing an ocean 3 times larger. No compass, no map, no instruments at all. Just their bodies, the sky, and knowledge passed down for 3,000 years. They didn't get lost. That's number 1 on today's list. 6 survival techniques. Each one built by people with no technology, no backup plan, and no second chance. Each one so effective. We still use versions of them today. Let's start. About 1 million years ago, somewhere in southern Africa, a group of early humans encountered something terrifying. And then they picked it up. Fire. Not the accidental campfire you picture in a textbook. The deliberate, intentional, repeated use of flame. And the moment it happened, the human story changed permanently. Here's what nobody talks about when it comes to early fire. Cooking food was probably not the first benefit. The first benefit was warmth at night. The second was predator protection. Big cats, wolves, hyenas, all of them hardwired to fear open flame. A small group of humans sitting around a fire suddenly had a defense system that required 0 weapons and 0 training. But here's the part that still gets me. Controlled fire changed the human brain. Literally. When our ancestors started cooking food, calories became far easier to extract. Over generations, the digestive system shrank. The skull expanded. More brain tissue grew into that space. Better memory, better reasoning, better problem solving. Richard Wrangham, a professor at Harvard, spent decades researching this. His conclusion was simple. Cooking is what made us human. Not tools, not language, fire. Now, how did ancient people start it? The most reliable method was something called the bow drill. A straight piece of hardwood, a spindle, a small notch carved into a flat fireboard. You drive the spindle using a simple bow. Friction builds heat in the notch. A coal forms. You transfer it into a bundle of dry tinder and breathe it slowly into flame. Sounds manageable. Takes most people 10 to 15 hours of practice before it works. Indigenous peoples across North America, Africa, and Australia mastered this completely. Some practitioners could produce fire in under 30 seconds. In rain, in wind, in temperatures well below freezing. Modern survival instructors call the bow drill the hardest practical skill to learn from scratch. Our ancestors taught it to their children before age 10. Fire kept them warm, kept predators away, made food safe to eat, and quietly, over hundreds of thousands of years, it built the brain that invented everything else on this list. Number 5 is about water. Specifically, how to find it in a place that looks completely dry. And the answer involves a piece of knowledge so precise that an entire continent was mapped using nothing but song. The Kalahari Desert, Southern Africa. Air temperature around 110 degrees Fahrenheit. Visible water, none. For the San people, one of the oldest surviving cultures on Earth. This isn't a crisis. It's an ordinary afternoon. The first thing they do is look up. Sandgrouse, doves, weaver birds. Birds that fly in straight lines at dawn and dusk are almost always flying toward water. Not sometimes, almost always. 70,000 years of watching the same birds in the same desert figured that out. But what if the sky is empty? Then you look at the ground. Certain plants grow only where groundwater sits close to the surface. Cottonwood trees, willows, cattails. In an otherwise bone-dry riverbed, a single cluster of green against all that brown almost always means water within 3 feet. You dig, you wait, You drink. But here's the part that stunned European explorers when they first heard about it. Aboriginal Australians had mapped every single water source on an entire continent. Nearly 3 million square miles of it. Not on paper. Not carved in stone. In song. The songlines. Ancient navigational routes stretching thousands of miles across desert. Encoded as music and story. Passed from generation to generation for tens of thousands of years. Each verse described a landmark. Each landmark held water, food, or shelter. Sing the right song in the right order, and the land itself told you exactly where to go. European explorers who dismissed the songlines as folklore died of thirst. Explorers who followed Aboriginal guides survived. This wasn't guesswork. It was a geographic information system. It just lived inside human memory instead of a database. Number 4 involves blood, and a plant named after a warrior who supposedly used it on a battlefield 3,000 years ago. Turns out, the legend was right. In 1991, hikers in the Italian Alps found a body frozen in a glacier. Scientists called him Otzi. He died roughly 5,300 years ago, and he was carrying a first aid kit. Inside a birch bark container in his pack, researchers found dried moss, specific varieties, carefully chosen. He wasn't carrying it for comfort. He was carrying it to stop bleeding. The moss was almost certainly sphagnum, and here's why that matters. A laboratory study in 1992 found that dried sphagnum moss absorbs up to 20 times its own weight in fluid. That's significantly more than cotton gauze. But it doesn't just absorb. The acidic chemical environment the moss creates actively inhibits the growth of harmful bacteria. It treats the wound at the same time it dresses it. Field medics in World War I used sphagnum dressings when cotton ran out. World War II medics did the same thing. Military reports from both wars confirmed it performed as well or better under field conditions. The people using it 10,000 years before those wars didn't know any of the chemistry. They just knew it worked. But here's the detail that genuinely changed how I think about ancient knowledge. Yarrow, a flowering plant, grows wild across North America, Europe, and Asia. The scientific name is Achillea millefolium, named after Achilles, because according to Greek legend, Achilles used this exact plant to treat the bleeding wounds of his soldiers during the Trojan War. That legend is 3,000 years old. Modern pharmacology tested it. Yarrow contains specific compounds that actively promote blood clotting. 3,000 years ago, a story was told about a warrior and a plant. The story survived long enough for scientists to run the tests, and the story was correct. The technique itself is simple. Find the plant. Use it fresh or dried. Pack it tightly into the wound. Apply pressure. Hold. The same mechanical principle used in modern combat hemostatic bandages. Just without the laboratory. Number 3 is about food. And a discovery so old and so effective that when NASA needed to solve a food problem for long-duration spaceflight, they ended up going back 10,000 years to find the answer. We're halfway through this list. Stay with me, because number 2 has a survival story inside it that most people have never heard. And number 1, those Polynesian sailors from the beginning, what they actually did out there on the open ocean, is more extraordinary than you're probably imagining right now. Let's keep going. In 2004, archaeologists digging in Denmark pulled a clay pot from the ground. Inside was something dark, dense, deeply pungent. They sent a sample to a lab. It was butter, 2,000 years old, and technically, still edible. Bog butter, a preservation method used across Ireland and Northern Europe for thousands of years. You pack fat or dairy into a wooden container, and bury it deep in a peat bog. The cold, acidic, oxygen-free environment stops bacterial decay almost completely. Food stored this way can survive for centuries. But bog butter is just the beginning. Here's the technique that actually changed everything. Fermentation. Somewhere between 10,000 and 13,000 years ago, humans began noticing something strange. Certain foods, left in the right conditions, didn't rot. They transformed. Cabbage left to sit became something sharper, denser, longer-lasting. Milk stored in an animal stomach lining turned thick and tangy. Fish packed in salt became a concentrated protein source that could feed a crew for months. Crushed grain mixed with water began to bubble and became something that kept people alive through famines. None of this was planned. Every single discovery was an accident. But every accident got remembered and passed on. The Inuit practiced a method called iguanak. Whole walrus or seabird carcasses buried under rocks and left to ferment for months. The result is extraordinarily calorie-dense. It smells like nothing else on Earth. And it kept entire Arctic communities alive through winters nothing else could survive. The Norse made skyr. The Koreans made kimchi. The Romans carried fermented fish sauce called garum to every corner of their empire. The Aztecs fermented pulque from agave. Every major civilization on Earth developed fermentation independently. Because every civilization that didn't starved when the harvest failed. Now, the NASA part. In the 1960s, NASA food scientists were developing rations for long-duration space missions. Lightweight, calorie-dense, shelf-stable without refrigeration. After testing dozens of laboratory-engineered options, they found that traditional fermented preparations kept outperforming everything the lab produced. Yogurt, fermented grains, aged cheese, 10,000 years old, still winning. Number 2 is about cold, and a man who survived something that should have been physically impossible. 24 days, alone, in the snow. In 2006, a man named Mitsutaka Uchikoshi fell asleep on a snowy mountainside in Japan. He wasn't found for 24 days. When search and rescue reached him, his core body temperature was 71 degrees Fahrenheit. The threshold doctors describe as unsurvivable is around 86 degrees. He was 15 degrees below that. His pulse was almost undetectable. His organs had effectively shut down. He made a complete recovery. His doctors called it one of the most extraordinary hypothermia survival cases ever recorded. The Inuit people of the Arctic would not have been surprised, because here is what Inuit survival knowledge has understood for at least 10,000 years. Snow is not the enemy. Wind is the enemy. Exposed skin in moving cold air is the enemy. Snow itself is an insulator. A quinzhee, a snow shelter built from a simple packed mound, holds an interior temperature of around 32 degrees Fahrenheit, no matter what happens outside. In minus 40-degree Arctic conditions, that 60-degree difference is the margin between dying within hours and surviving for a week. Here's how you build one. Pile snow into a dome about 8 feet high. Then wait 2 full hours. This part is critical. During those 2 hours, the snow crystals bond and harden on their own. The dome becomes structurally solid. Then you hollow it out from one end. Leave the walls about 10 inches thick. Push a stick through the top to create a small ventilation hole. Sleep on a raised platform inside, so the coldest air sinks below your body, not around it. But here's the part that goes against everything your instincts will tell you. When a person is freezing, every physical instinct screams, move, run, generate heat through action. Inuit survival knowledge says the exact opposite. Stop moving. Find shelter first. Remove any wet clothing immediately. Trap the heat your body is already producing before you try to make more. Your body generates heat constantly. The only question is whether you're losing it faster than you're making it. Modern wilderness medicine confirms every part of this. The leading cause of death in cold weather survival situations is wet clothing left against the skin. The second leading cause is exhaustion from trying to stay warm by staying active. The Inuit discovered both of those facts without a medical school, probably 10,000 years before the first one existed. And they built a civilization at the top of the world because of what they learned. And now, number 1, the open ocean. 3,000 miles of it. No land in any direction. And a people who crossed it, using only their eyes, their skin, and their memory. Here is what we know for certain. Between roughly 3,000 and 1,000 years ago, Polynesian sailors settled virtually every habitable island in the Pacific Ocean. Hawaii, New Zealand, Easter Island, a triangle of ocean covering roughly 10 million square miles. They did this without a compass, without a sextant, without any navigational instrument that Europe wouldn't develop for another 1,000 years. And they did it deliberately. These were not people blown off course by a storm. They set out to find specific islands, and they found them. The question that puzzled Western researchers for centuries was simple. How? The answer, when it was finally documented in the 1970s and 80s, was so sophisticated that oceanographers and astronomers still study it today. It started with the stars. Polynesian navigators memorized the rising and setting positions of over 150 stars. Not approximately, precisely. They knew which star rose directly over which island at which time of year. They sailed toward a star the way you might aim for a fixed point on a distant shore. As one star set, another took its place in the mental map. Hour by hour, through the entire night, the navigator held course from memory alone. But stars disappear in daylight, and clouds hide them at night, so they read the ocean itself. Ocean swells travel thousands of miles from their storm of origin, without losing their direction. A trained Polynesian navigator could feel the dominant swell pattern through the hull of the canoe, and use it as a compass even when the sky was completely hidden. Some navigators reportedly lay on their backs in the hull during storms, feeling the motion of the boat against their spine, reading swell direction through their body. When their eyes were useless, they also read clouds. Land creates its own cloud formations. A stationary cloud sitting on the horizon in open ocean often means an island beneath it. Polynesian navigators knew exactly which cloud shapes to look for, and could detect land up to 30 miles away before it was visible. They read birds. Certain species fly out to sea in the morning and return to land in the evening. A change in bird species in open water signals a different ecosystem nearby, which means land is close. They read phosphorescence. The bioluminescent glow of plankton in the water changes near islands and reefs. Night navigation included watching the color and pattern of the glowing sea beneath them. And they read the wind, not just its direction, the smell. The scent of vegetation, soil, and fresh water can carry offshore for miles. A skilled navigator could smell an island before seeing it. All of this knowledge, every star, every swell, every cloud and bird and scent, was held entirely in the human mind. No written charts, no instruments, passed from master navigator to apprentice over years of training, encoded in chants and stories that began in childhood. In the 1970s, a Micronesian master navigator named Mau Pielug, one of the last traditional wayfinders still alive, agreed to teach his knowledge to a Hawaiian crew. In 1976, that crew sailed a traditional double-hulled canoe called Hākule from Hawaii to Tahiti. 2,400 miles. No instruments. No GPS. Using only what their ancestors had used for 3,000 years. They arrived within 30 miles of their target landfall. After the voyage, Mau Pielug said something in an interview. He said, "The ocean is not empty. It is full of information. We were just taught how to read it. That's not a survival skill. That's a library, stored inside human beings, carried across 3,000 years, across 10 million square miles of open ocean. The most sophisticated navigation system ever developed without technology. And it almost disappeared. By the 1960s, traditional Polynesian wayfinding had nearly died out completely. Mau Pielug was one of perhaps a handful of people still alive who held the full knowledge. When he agreed to teach it again, he saved something that 40 generations of human beings had carried across the largest ocean on Earth. 6 techniques. 40,000 years. Controlled fire. The discovery that rewired our brains and made civilization biologically possible. Water sourcing. An entire continent mapped in song. Carried for 70,000 years. Natural wound care. Field medicine so effective that 2 world wars confirmed what ancient peoples already knew. Fermentation. An accidental discovery that outlasted the NASA laboratory trying to improve on it. Cold weather survival. The counterintuitive truth that snow protects you and movement kills you. And Polynesian wayfinding. A library of knowledge about stars, swells, birds, clouds, and wind, stored entirely in human memory, used to navigate 10 million square miles of open ocean without a single instrument. Every technique on this list was built by people who had no other option. No manual, no backup plan, just observation, memory, and the decision to pass what they learned to the next generation. Here's the thought I keep coming back to. All of it almost disappeared. Mau Pielug, the songlines, the bow drill, the sphagnum kits. Every single technique on this list came within 1 generation of being lost forever, before someone decided it was worth saving. What else did we lose before anyone thought to ask? Drop your answer in the comments. Which of these 6 surprised you most? And which one do you think we're in the most danger of forgetting? I read every single one. If this gave you something, share it.